pose a question this morning which emerges out of something I was told early on in my business career, is that you never realize the true value of a company until you sell it. And if you want to sell it, you need to be able to account for the true value of it to the buyer. And I think the point I want to make this morning is that is the asset value of landscapes a missing piece in the conservation and biodiversity financing thinking? And so if we look at our own wildlife economy report, we can see that there's a huge focus always on revenue. And if you listen to many of the talks that have been presented today, there's a focus on revenue. And of course, revenue is hugely important. But what we've done as a School of Wildlife Conservation is come together with a group of partners, Dalberg, sustainability or development consultants based out of their Dar es Salaam office, and FSD Africa, which is a specialist UK-funded development agency looking at increasing the sophistication and range of financial transactions that are done in Africa, not only around biodiversity and conservation, but they certainly include that as an opportunity. And we've formed a BIRA, the Biodiversity Investment Research and Advisory Grouping. Always looking for partners, always looking for debate. The purpose of the grouping is to push the thinking, develop the frameworks, and engage around this new opportunity around biodiversity investment. And to focus specifically on Africa, and why is Africa important? Why does it need a separate focus? It's our view that Africa has the potential to be a carbon, biodiversity, and climate change mitigation superpower. Large mammals, there's nowhere in the world you can take a picture like that. Not a continent left in the world other than Africa where you can get a picture like that. And these large mammals are very closely linked to the functioning of the ecosystems. We know that large populations of herbivores and carnivores have clear links to carbon accumulation and uptake in savanna soils, natural regeneration of forests, elephants spreading seeds around, and generally just maintaining ecosystem function. Most of the world have lost these populations. In addition to that, we look to our people. And I'm going to take the opportunity to address an elephant in the room. And yes, I have been waiting a long time to use that metaphor at a conservation conference. I know that many of you have attitudes to population growth in rural communities that need to change, to be honest. We see people as an input into this superpower. We see our young people as representing hope, opportunity, innovation, energy, enthusiasm. And they're going to be 40% of the global workforce. And we intend to transfer the skills and take advantage of this opportunity rather than to see it as a negative for conservation. So let's talk about revenue. The Wildlife Economy Report lists tourism, hunting, wildlife ranching, non-timber forest products, and carbon as the big five of the wildlife economy. And these are really important. Revenue, the money generated from normal business operations calculated as the average sales price times the number of units sold. But biodiversity valuation changes everything when we start thinking about revenue. Biodiversity underpins ecosystem function. It underpins revenue. Functioning ecosystems are an input into the economy. And if we wanted to add some things to the wildlife economy, we would add biodiversity metrics for compliance and risk assessment. We would add flood abatement. We would add water purification. We would add pollination. All of these services that have a value that come out of a functioning ecosystem. And so, why aren't we valuing our conservation efforts as an asset in the way that you would have if you had a house? You wouldn't just value that house on the rental income that you can get from it. You'd value it in its own right as an asset on your balance sheet. And I find that a lot of conservation businesses are very poorly structured around their accounting systems. And so we almost completely ignore the asset value of landscapes and only focus on revenue. And when we value our companies, we value the revenue generation, which is essential and really important. But we forget about this massive underpinning of biodiversity that's supporting that revenue generation, much in the same way that a house can be rented out and generate revenue, but has asset value in an accounting sense if you were to value a house rental company or an office block. You would not exclude the value of the asset that generates the revenue. And so if we look at this definition here, that an asset is a resource with economic value that an individual, corporation, or country owns or controls with the expectation that it will provide a future benefit. And the country part, really interesting there, because that speaks to Ed Norton's point about the undervaluation of our natural resources and our biodiversity. That sounds like biodiversity to me, that definition. So how would we go about doing this? What about carbon? We've just heard a great presentation in a hugely successful carbon project. Mostly talking about revenue, how revenue generates an income to provide for communities and to build clinics, and all of that is important. It's great. What if we took some of that carbon and didn't sell it, put it on our balance sheet? We know that the price of carbon is increasing over the next 20 to 30 years. Why wouldn't you value a company with some of the carbon on the balance sheet in the asset column rather than keeping it always in the revenue generation column? When it comes to biodiversity, things are a lot more complicated, of course. But if we take the position that biodiversity is what is underpinning all of this, and I don't think anybody disputes that, we must find a way to put biodiversity as a value on an asset sheet that reflects our true efforts in terms of what we do in conservation. And there are methods for doing that. There's accounting methods and accounting standards. We don't need to really invent anything new here. We can take the future value of revenue and use that to value biodiversity over annual periods or 5-year periods. And so I think what we need is increasing sophistication in the valuation of landscapes. We need to think about an asset value here. In the same way that a company would think about its complete range of revenue and assets, produce a set of accounts with a balance sheet that has a true value. And this would lead into what we lack in conservation, which is scale. If we had 100 cement factories across Africa, what would happen? Pretty soon, you'd get takeovers, you get buyouts, you get consolidation. Why? Because you can put a value very easily on these types of companies. We can't do that in conservation. We can't value these companies, so we can't consolidate. We can't attract investors. We can't present them with a balance sheet that means anything to them. And so we can't achieve economies of scale. And the industry continues to be a small mom and dad type home industry with hundreds of operators, all doing different things, different ways, all trying to attract funding from donors, all competing, all having different perspectives. We never get a unified vision of what the industry could be, and we never scale. And so I'm going to leave that out there as a question. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. It was posed as a question. This is the kind of thinking that we're generating within the partnership, the Bureau partnership. We'd be happy to engage with any other organizations. I know there's a lot of thinking going on around this biodiversity investment piece. It's really on the boil at the moment. And thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to engaging with you after the talk. Thanks very much.